Hello and welcome. So as we are fast approaching the day of love, when Cupid gets his arrow and fires it at some unlucky soul, we need to talk about the history of it, the true history of Valentine's. Now, of course, as with everything online, you never really know what the truth is. There's always conflicting ideas of what the history was really like. So take everything with a pinch, grain, handful, whatever of salt, okay? So it all started in Rome. I mean, everything starts in Rome, doesn't it, pretty much? On February the 15th. No, in February 15. So the year 15? Or is it the year 1500? I don't actually know. It just said 15. They celebrated a feast called Lupercalia. A poor goat and a dog were sacrificed. It always seems to be a goat. They got sacrificed in Jurassic Park. It's always a goat. It's a fucking goat. Then they took their skin off, tapped it to their head for luck, and then whooped the shit out of their women with it. Okay. True story. Apparently the women lined up to be whipped with the skin of a goat and a dog because they believed it would make them fertile. But, you know, something tells me that maybe they weren't actually queuing up to be beaten by men. It was probably something that was forced upon them, or at least the idea was being forced upon them, like, you know, you and only you are responsible for fertility because you're a woman. After that, the women's names would be put into a jar as like a lucky draw, a lucky dip, whatever. And the men would pick a name, and then they would be matched with that lucky lady. And they would stay together for the remainder of the festival. They would be matched for the remainder of the festival. Or if it went really, really well, they would be matched forever. Oh, so I'm going to talk about the next bit, but there was sort of like two different ideas online that I found, so we'll just roll with it. Basically, Pope Gelasius apparently ended Lupercalia, whatever, and started St. Valentine's Day to instead celebrate love rather than such extreme beatings of women and sacrificial goats and doggos. So he did that. So apparently there were two men that this holiday could be named after, and they were both saints, obviously. Saint Valentine. No shit, right? Emperor Claudius II Gothicus executed a priest called St. Valentine of Terni. I can barely even read my writing, this is the issue. The priest went against his orders to basically not marry people. Not like him marrying people, but being a priest, as in officiating a wedding. It wasn't a weird three-way, it was like he was making these people married, essentially. Just want to be clear. So he was secretly marrying these young couples. But Emperor Gothicus really didn't appreciate this. He was like, I want my men single, miserable and alone because they make the best soldiers. They have nothing to lose. If you have no one to love, you have nothing to lose. My sort of question is, however, love does exist outside marriage. People marry because they fall in love. So the love comes first. So whether they're married or not makes no difference. But we are talking like many, many years ago, so people didn't think, you know. So yeah, anyway, long story short, the priest was killed, executed by Gothicus because he was pissed that he basically went against his orders and made his soldiers weak and lovey-dovey. So because this priest, he was executed on what day? February the 14th. And because this priest represented love and he sacrificed his life for love, Valentine's Day was named after him. Okay? But there was also another Valentine who was put in prison by the same emperor. This guy didn't really like people by the sounds of it being happy or anything like that. He didn't want, well, actually, he was put in prison because he didn't want to worship the Roman gods, supposedly. So he signed a letter while he was in prison, while he was caged up and alone. He signed a letter saying, blah, 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 from your Valentine. This letter was sent to a lady who he healed from blindness, which is a good job too, otherwise she wouldn't have been able to read that letter. Apparently Valentine's Day was also named after, or could have been, hello? Sorry, I wasn't focused. Could have been named after him because he, I don't know, signed a letter from your like saying from your Valentine. The first one makes more sense to me. This one's a stretch, if you ask my personal opinion. But it could also be the truth. I don't know. When Valentine's Day came a thing, that and Lupercalia were kind of like combined for a bit. So I don't know if they sort of like did a bit of sacrifice and then a bit of loving, you know, but it was kind of more, let's get drunk and celebrate love and fertility. In other words, let's get pissed and shag. I reckon that was basically what it was in the end, you know, disguised as like, oh, this deep, meaningful celebration about fertility and blah, 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 you know. I'm not complaining, but like, come on, you know, let's be real. The Normans also had their own celebration called Gelatin's Day, which means lover of women, which that sounds quite nice. Like, was that like a celebration of women, do you think? Or was it too much to ask for that kind of time? I don't know. I feel like we went through maybe a phase years and years ago where it was like, let's celebrate women and all this shit. And then we went, let's hate women. And I still feel like we're coming out of that a little bit. But it was really our man, Shakespeare in love, Shakespeare, who made Valentine's Day popular and kind of made it what it is kind of now in Britain and Europe. Handmade cards were the ultimate token of love in these days as well. And then Hallmark cards came along in the 19th century, and they really like brought Valentine's Day cards to the masses. And then it all became something even scarier. Commercialised. I know of people who spend absolutely hundreds of pounds on their significant other for Valentine's Day, and then they can't afford to pay a certain bill, for example. It's like, this month's gonna be really, like, we're gonna struggle a lot because I spent like 300 quid on my husband, but we can't afford to pay our mortgage. And it's just like, how did we get here? I mean, we were killing goats and whipping women with their hides, and now we're like doing this. Like, come on. That's that. Let's move on to Vinegar Valentines. Now, I never heard of this, actually, if I'm honest. It's not just like where you drink vinegar on Valentine's Day to maybe, like, you know, get rid of the demons. That's not it. But, so imagine it's the 1840s. It's just coming up to Valentine's Day. You have such a crush on someone. You're looking for the perfect card for them, the perfect gift. But leading up to this moment, you get a card through the door and you're like, oh my God, what is it? And then you open it and basically you get a Vinegar Valentine. You're reading it and your heart is crushed. Your soul is broken. You can't breathe. You break down, you cry. Basically, if you suspect that someone is into you and you're kind of like, oh, fuck's sake, they're going to send me a Valentine's card, they're going to like profess their love to me, I just can't be dealing with this. You send them a Vinegar Valentine to say, look, I'm not interested in you. And then there's some kind of like insulting poem on it as well. It's just basically like, UGLY, you ain't got no alibi, you ugly, like that kind of thing. And yeah, guess it kind of avoids that awkward, like, you having to turn them down if they ask you out. Because the weird thing is, though, a lot of these were, like, most of them were anonymous, so you'd send it to someone and you wouldn't even put your name on it, and I'm like, well, how do they then know? So they normally had a poem and a picture. It was kind of more of a postcard, really, than a card that you open. And I guess if they're sent anonymously, you don't even need to write to blah, blah, blah from blah, 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 do you? You just give it to that person or send it to that person. You probably do put their name on it and then just, like, let the card do the work. There were two different types, I suppose. They were kind of comical. They were kind of really horrible as well. Just depended how horrible you wanted to be to that person, I guess. Oh, and also just to rub vinegar into the wounds, they also had to pay the postage. You know, when have you ever been sent a letter or a parcel and the person sending it has not paid enough postage on that, and you get a letter through the door or whatever to say your parcel is to be collected from the post office, but you have to pay X amount of postage. Well, it was like that, except they didn't even bother to pay any postage, because why should they pay postage to just tell someone that they're ugly and to stay away from them? So the recipient had to pay postage as well to probably get their hopes up that they were getting something good, and then they got a Vinegar Valentine instead. Harsh world back then, you know. So there was a guy called Cameron C. Nichols who wrote in Civil War Humour, I'm guessing it was some kind of magazine, book, newspaper, I don't know, that Vinegar Valentine's cards were tasteless, even vulgar, and were sent to drunks, shrews, bachelors, old maids, dandies, flirts, and penny pinchers, and the like. Quote. He didn't like these. He didn't like the people that sent them. He probably didn't even like the people... Well, he clearly didn't like the people that received them either. So, yeesh. But yes, they were often, like I say, comical. So they were often quite sarcastic and light-hearted, but some were genuinely hurtful. For example, there was one card addressed to an old maid that went something like this. "'Tis all in vain, your simpering looks. You can never incline, with all your bustles, strays and curls, to find a Valentine." I mean, I guess that meant something back then. I mean, I'd have read that and just been like, is that good? Or... I mean, it's not, because it says you basically can't find a Valentine, basically. But I will show you. I will find one. You just wait. There were even ones, this gets a bit deep, ones who were targeted at women who fought for their right to vote, so suffragettes, basically. Making these women out to be ugly, horrible people. Doesn't surprise me, though, because... there are certain men in the world, even today, who just hate the idea of women having any kind of right. You know, I mean, Christ. Just imagine what it was like back then when men were used to having their women do nothing other than serve them. And then suddenly they're like, bitch, we want to vote. And then they're like, whoa, couldn't handle that shit. So they had to send Vinegar Valentines to them to just prove that point. But anyway, the women fired back, okay, with more light-hearted cards saying things like, no vote, no kiss. I like stuff like that, because it's like, they're not even firing back with anything really horrible. It's just like, we're going to send something that takes the piss, basically. They were really popular in the 1900s. I can't even imagine being around at that time and just seeing all these Vinegar Valentine's cards flying around to people I know, me even, and, you know, just being like, wow, damn. Now it's just all lovey-dovey and gross. Eventually it died down sort of in the 1970s. They still sold a few, but not nearly as many as they did. 1970s, that's quite late. I wonder if my parents knew anything about this. But yeah, and then you get to these days where you don't see any, or at least I've never seen. I've seen like insulting Valentine's cards, but they are clearly to your spouse. But it's like, your farts smell like shit, but I love you anyway, you know, stuff like that. But I've never actually seen a Vinegar Valentine, have you? Happy Valentine's Day. If you are on your own, if you do not have love for Valentine's Day, just remember that it doesn't matter, because it's not just Valentine's that you don't have love for, it's every day of the year. Happy Valentine's Day if you are celebrating. I don't feel like you have to spend a shit ton of money on your spouse, especially if you don't have a shit ton of money. It's absolutely ridiculous. And don't feed into this commercialised bullshit. Alright? I've had enough of it. Anyway, let's get Vinegar Valentine's Day cards back on the shelf. See you soon. Take care.